Thanks so much for being here, my friends. We are talking about lawn care tonight, so it's great to see Liz 2 times in one day. That's awesome. So we got other folks here. You can use the chat. Hopefully it's working on your end, but you can use the chat and just say hello and where you're coming from there. Would really appreciate it. But we are just going to dive right in here. So I just appreciate everybody being here. We're going to record this so folks can watch it later as well. But we are going to pull up a screen and get rolling. So this way. So tonight we're going to talk about lazy lawn care. So lazy lawn care. So we have put lazy lawn care together. Goal at Minnesota Gardening is we really want to reduce the amount of chemicals that are used, reduce the amount of fertilizer that's used, eliminate chemicals, feed pollinators, save water, and also store carbon. And so these are the things that we're working on. And a lot of folks use lawn care as an excuse or a way to just put tons of chemicals on their lawn and to use a lot of petroleum fertilizer, to use a lot of gas for lawn mowing, those kinds of things. And it's just not necessary. It's just not where we need to be on things. And so with that, I want to make sure that we are teaching everything we possibly can for how we can use a lazy lawn care method in order to make sure that we are reducing the amount of fertilizer we're using, eliminating chemicals in our lawn and landscape, reducing the amount of water, and being lazy about it. Because in lawn care, not many things in life are this way, but in lawn care, being lazy is one of the very best ways to do that, because you use significantly less of those things. You save time on mowing, you save time on fertilizing and using chemicals. And so it is a really good thing. So we're going to go through a series of pieces today. 1 is the hockey stick curve. 2 is seasons in your lawn. 3 is reducing your water use. 4 is mowing. 5 is reducing fertilizer. 6 is eliminating weed control, and 7 is odds and ends. And then we're going to go back through it all through there. So if you have questions about lawn care that you want me to go through today and you want to have answered, go ahead and put those in the chat and I will make sure to get to them. So if you go there. Oh, thanks, Katie. I'm glad you could see it. So I wasn't totally messing it up on everybody as that goes forward. So just use the chat and make sure to share on there what you have questions about and where it's at. And so I will be able to see that as we're going through, and we'll roll from there. First, however, I want to make sure that you all have the document. So there is a really great document that we have at minnesotagardening.com that everyone can use. And if you go into gardening.com, we'll share this here so you can see it. Share. So if you go into minnesotagardening.com and click on the Minnesota Gardening community here on the left-hand side, there's a download for you, so you can see that download. So if you're in the Minnesota Gardening community right now, you've got this. So you just can click on this download. If you click, you'll get a document that looks like this. This is kind of our baby and our Bible for how we're going to roll through things today and what we talk about. So this is a cheat sheet for all the things lazy lawn care that I want to make sure you have. So you can go, that's a free download that anybody can get. You don't need to be a member of Minnesota Gardening, but you can go there and grab that for sure. So that is there at minnesotagardening.com for everyone to grab. So one thing that's not on there, Laura, we can definitely get to Dog Spot Repair for sure. We'll hit that in the odds and ends piece of the evening. So first thing I want to start with is not on the sheet. So this is a little additional that you guys get just special. And so with that, lawn care is a really, really tough thing. So a lot of folks, we get hit constantly with images on Instagram, from True Green ChemLawn, from all those folks. Notice that True Green dropped the ChemLawn from their name, but from all those folks about this like iconic, perfect, Father's Day picnic on the lawn that they expect everyone to have. And so we've got this whole thing set up that we need to have a perfectly green lawn that looks like center field at Target Field, that looks like, the fourth fairway on Hazeltine, that kind of thing. And that this is the expectation that we're supposed to have. A lot of this falls on dads for this expectation, but also a lot of it falls on what people want in their lawns. And it's a really unrealistic and terrible expectation. So first off, lawns are monocultures, and so they are really bad for insects and for local ecosystems. They kill off. They don't have any food for all of our bird friends that we want to have being healthy, all of our insect friends that we want to have being healthy. Lawns are just bad for that first off. And so, but there's really very much a lot of times, if you have kids, especially if you just like the look of it, there are other reasons to actually have lawns. And we're not going to get into the ethics and the philosophy around lawns tonight, because there are really great ways where you can have bee lawns and introduce clover to help to have pollinators and bees have places that they can live within your lawn. There are a lot of things you can do that way. We're not going to get into that tonight in this lawn care workshop. We're just going to take the expectation that people want to have a lawn. And so if you want to have a lawn, we also want to take that expectation and move it to the next levels, where you don't have this perfectly green lawn where we're eliminating chemical use, where we're reducing fertilizer use and reducing water use, because it takes a ton of energy in order to get a lawn to look like that center field at Target Field. So it takes a lot to get to that point. And so it's a hockey stick curve that just goes up exponentially as you go forward. And so kind of in that little sweet spot right before you hit the curve is what we kind of call here at Minnesota Garden, we call good enough lawns. And so these are lawns that are green the vast majority of the year round. They are lawns that have some weeds in them. They don't have to have tons of weeds in them, whatever your threshold level is there for what you want to see, as well as they don't have to be perfect. We don't need to have perfect lawns, and we should really normalize and push that forward as ways where we do our work together. And so these lawns that aren't exactly these picturesque advertising type lawns are where we are headed and where we need to head, because we have to be able to reduce those inputs, because it does cost a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of energy to make those perfectly green, perfect lawns through there. So that's what we're going to work on here today, is that bottom of the hockey stick graph, where we are having good enough lawns that aren't perfect, but they also don't take all that energy that it requires in order to get to that level. And so the first place we're going to start today is talking about water use. And so with water use, there are really two different times of the year where it's really important that we have a very clear understanding of what is necessary for water use. And so with that, in the spring, we have a significant amount of growth that happens with our turf. And so with that, turf is growing. This is a really great graphic that I love to use from the U of M. It's from U of M Extension. And so this is their How Grass Grows graph. And so we've got this really big growth in the spring. We've got this really big growth in the fall. And then we've got a decline that happens during the summer months when it gets hot. And when we have normal years in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, it also generally gets really dry during that time period as well. And so this first spring growth side, we need to make sure that we are conditioning our lawns for this summer decline side of things. So if you have an irrigation system in your lawn, if you like to water it, this year hasn't been anything. So no one should have used a single solitary drop of irrigation on their lawn pretty much anywhere in Minnesota this whole spring. It has been very much unnecessary and completely wasted. But if you do want to have a green lawn that lasts for the majority of the year round, you will need to supplement with some water. Lawns take about an inch of water each week in order to maintain at least some level of growth and stay green and not get super stressed out and go into dormancy periods. And so with that, what we want to do is we want to encourage that grass to grow as deep of roots as possible. And so in the spring months, you don't want to water very often if you're watering at all. So if you choose to have lawns that are just good enough, you don't need to put much water on. But if you are watering, you want to make sure that you're watering just once a week and once or twice a week with about a half an inch of water each time. And what that does is that water seeps deep and it pushes those roots in order to grow deeper through those months. So like this. And so it's the top growth on the plants are analogous with that root growth on the plants. And so they are both there. And so we're going to skip over to fall here real quick as well, because you see that root growth is really deep in the fall also. And so you have that same type of growth that happens in those months. But that fall time is when our grass plants are moving all the nutrients from the top into the soil. And so they are having photosynthesis. They're doing lots of things. And so they are moving all those nutrients and storing them down in the soil. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger for you all. think that's a little bit better. And so they're storing them down in the root system. And so we are growing those roots for making it through the entire winter. So we have 2 seasons where we are pushing to make sure that our grass plants and our turf are able to make it through the following season. And so what you want to do in the fall is the exact same thing as the spring. You want to water infrequently and water deeper so that those roots go deeper so they're able to survive winter better. But then as we get to summer, when most of us are doing some sort of watering of our lawns, then if we want to keep them, if we want to have them stay green, again, so this is all, you get to choose your own adventure of which of these things you want to have happen. So if you don't care if your lawn stays green all summer, you don't have to do any watering of it whatsoever unless we get seriously extended dry periods like we did last summer. But you can just leave it for the most part and just make sure that every month it gets a little bit of water, and the grass will be just fine. It'll come back. But if you want it to stay green, these are the things that you have to do for it. And so in the summer, as you can see, they have significantly shorter and smaller roots. And the problem with that is that area up right underneath of the grass, that first inch or two of soil, stays and gets a lot hotter in the summer, and it dries out a lot faster. So you need to water more infrequently, but use less water so you're not wasting water. Because if you do deep watering during the summer season, when that July, August, and sometimes into September, where that grass is not having the deep roots, you are wasting that water, and it's just not going to be able to be used by that turf. And so you want to water more often, like every other day, but just a quarter inch at a time. So you're keeping that layer moist at the top of the grass so that it is rolling from there and it stays an active growth cycle, and you're not wasting water at the same time. So Grady asked, what happens if it rains 8 days a week? It has been insane. It has been really, really crazy. A lot of times in Minnesota, what happens is we get these really wet periods like we've been having right now, and then the spigot shuts off and we turn into hot, dry really fast. And so this grass is not meant to be here. Like, grass is just simply not meant to grow in Minnesota. So this is the Kentucky bluegrass, and most of the turf type grasses that we use are native to Eastern Europe. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough just a second. Sorry about that. I'm at the very tail end of a cold here, but they are not native to the United States. So they're not native specifically to the upper Midwest, where we have these seasons which are drastic and very highly changing. And so they aren't meant to grow here. And so we are forcing them into a place where they aren't native, where they aren't expected to grow. And so they will go dormant unless we take drastic measures and put a lot of energy into keeping it that way. And so a lot of times what happens in Minnesota is we get these really extended wet periods, and then that spigot turns off, it gets hot and dry, and the grass just doesn't know what the hell to do with itself. And so it switches from these cooler, wet type events that we've been having this last month and a half to hot, dry, and it just gets shocked into that. And so that's when, if you don't want it to go brown, if you don't want it to go dormant, if you want to have a place where your kids can play still, then you will want to water frequently, but just a little bit of water. And so from there, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. If the roots are grown long, why are they then short in the summer? So Liz asks, so what happens is the grass knows that the grass cannot support those deep roots. So once it gets into the summer months, when it is under significant amount of stress with the heat and with the general usually dryness of the season, the grass sloughs those off. So it just kills those roots off. It's kind of analogous to if you think about a evergreen tree, and the evergreen trees, they don't have any use anymore for those shaded bottom branches a lot of times on spruce trees specifically. And so they kill off those branches because they're just not producing any photosynthesis. They're not doing anything for the tree, so they kill those off. Same thing with the grass plants, is they kill those deeper roots off because they just can't use them and can't support them during the hot months of summer. So hopefully that answers that question there. So this is the seasons that we go through and we need to make sure that the work that we're doing is matching the season. So watering more often during the summer months, less often during the spring and fall months, in order to keep our grass green through that season. And so that is the seasons of our lawn. And so reducing that water use there. So that's number 2 and 3. I kind of combine those two into a single one, because that's where we're at here. And so now we're going to talk about mowing. And thanks for everybody for asking the questions there. So you know me that I like to answer questions a lot more than I like to talk. So any questions you've got, make sure to add those in the chat there. So next we're going to talk about mowing. This is a really, really simple one that the vast majority of people, as you drive through suburban landscapes and urban landscapes, that they mess up with this turf. So you want to make sure to mow as high as you possibly can. And so get a mower that has a really high mowing deck that you're able to do. I found that a lot of new battery mowers, electric mowers, have really high abilities to go on their deck, but you want to make sure that you have at least 3 to 4 inches that you're able to go. And so you want to let that grass grow as high as it possibly can, because that does a lot of really great things for your turf. If you mow it really high, it takes and it gives the grass, so it helps that grass keep the energy and is producing enough photosynthesis to support those deep roots. So it helps you keep deeper roots by leaving the grass grow tall. And then secondly, it shades the ground, so it covers the ground more fully, which then keeps the ground cooler and it doesn't heat up and then force dormancy on the turf. And then third thing it does is it helps to shade out any weed seeds or many of the weed seeds. So you use less chemicals. If you go that route, you have to work less to keep the weeds out of your lawn that you really don't want to have there. And so there are a lot of really good reasons for mowing your grass high. And so it looks kind of goofy. So if you're not used to it, it can look goofy. This is the way I've always mowed my grass, so it's not really a problem for me. But if you have just straight up like Kentucky bluegrass, it can get kind of floppy and it will fall over, and it looks a little different than what your neighbors might look who's mowing it at like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, because they think they should look like a golf green somewhere. But we should not be supporting that type of landscape lawn here in our houses. And so you want to let that grow as high as you possibly can. And so longer lawns shade the ground and keep the soil cooler during the summer months, encouraging deeper roots, less water, and less chemicals to manage the weeds. So that's our next thing on mowing. So that's number 4 that we're working on. So first thing we've talked is that hockey stick curve of how much inputs are necessary for lawns. So the more perfect you want your lawn to look, the more inputs is needed, and that's an exponential change. And so you want to make sure that you're somewhere at the bottom where you don't need to be putting a lot of chemicals and time and energy into your lawns. Then the second thing is seasons of your lawn, so making sure that we're focusing on the spring and that fall season. And then third thing is watering, and so making sure that we are watering appropriately for each season and mowing appropriately for it as well. A lot of folks ask me about in the fall. They've always heard you should mow it low in the fall. And that's not, unless you have problems with, the reason for that is called snow mold. And so you may or may not see snow mold. It lasts for 2 or 3 days in the spring when it's still cold out, but things are starting to melt. And so it's a mold that you can see. You see it on mulch sometimes, you see it on landscape beds sometimes, but then you see it in grass, and it doesn't really have any correlation to the length of your grass whatsoever. If you're going to have snow mold, you're going to have snow mold. It doesn't matter how tall or short your grass is. But a lot of people used to believe that longer grass encouraged more snow mold, and that's just not the case. So you don't need to reduce that. A lot of folks reduce and make it a lot shorter in the fall, so it's shorter going into the winter. But that does a couple things. One, that taller grass protects the root system through the winter, and it helps to moderate those temperatures, because when you have dieback in the winter, it's usually from massive temperature swings, from getting hotter and then getting really cold. And so that kind of thing. So that is, the temperature swings are what really cause that to happen. And so by having that longer grass, it moderates those temperature swings through there and does a really good job of that for there. So that's number 4. For us, number 5 is reducing fertilizer. So there are a lot of folks that are really going to hate this part of it. There are a lot of folks that really think that we need to use a ton of fertilizer on our lawns. But fertilizer, most folks don't know that fertilizer came from during military tests. Fertilizer was discovered after they were exploding some bombs and discovered that nitrogen was helping the grass grow, and that those bombs were releasing nitrogen. And so it is something that a lot of people use a ton. And so fertilizer that we use on not a day-to-day basis, but the fertilizer that you can buy at Home Depot or your garden center or wherever you're at is fertilizer that is very much derived from petroleum, unless you get organic fertilizer, which is usually really expensive and much more difficult to access. But fertilizer is petroleum based, so it comes from oil, and it's a really bad thing. So some folks have come to call our traditional lawn care type thing as petroleum-based lawn care. And I like that. It's a little wonky. You got to do a lot of explaining to it, but it's very, very true. Sorry about that. And so it's really important that we reduce and eliminate the amount of fertilizer we use. So if you have a pet, if you have an animal that is on your lawn, you really don't have to use any fertilizer whatsoever. If you care, it could be a little off sometimes, and it can have some spots that are greener than other spots for obvious reasons, but you just don't have to. Like in our backyard, I haven't ever used any fertilizer because we have a dog that lives back there. Front yard, for a long time, we used fertilizer in the front yard because my wife really wanted it. Her father is a current, I don't know if you ever lose that title, but a Scott's Lawn Pro. And so lawn is very much we've very much worked her out of that, that line of thinking for things, but it is something that cared about a lot and making sure. So we would use minimal amounts of fertilizer in our front yard just to keep it looking more respectable. And so that's how we kind of learned that you don't need nearly as much fertilizer in order to keep things looking decent as a lot of folks tell you had. So we highly recommend in the fall, when we're hitting that second really good growth cycle and getting into the winter months. In the fall, sometime between around Labor Day is the best time to do it, anywhere a couple weeks on either side of Labor Day. And so use 1/2 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And so depending on what kind of fertilizer spreader you have, how that works for you, but you want to use just 1/2 pound. So you're going to have soil tests. They're going to tell you to use a lot more. You're going to have the bag of fertilizer telling you need to use a lot more, but you simply don't. It doesn't make any sense. And you don't need to use those recommendations. All you need to do, and so Elizabeth, this gets to your question of, do you have to use fertilizer? You haven't been. What fertilizer does, so we're going back to the fact that grass was not meant to grow here, just wasn't meant to grow here. And so we have to give these inputs in order to make that happen. So these turf grass types of plants that we have, they're really, really high users of nitrogen. They use a lot of nitrogen. And so you need to compensate for that use of nitrogen, because if you don't do that, then that grass thins out. And then what happens is you start to get a lot of weeds in there, and a lot of noxious weeds, which you do need to do things about. So that's one thing. And so it allows a lot more weeds to start growing in your lawn. But secondly, it allows for a lot more erosion to happen. And so we don't want that layer of soil to erode off of your lawn and go into the water system, because that takes a lot of phosphorus with it, that takes a lot of micronutrients with it, which cause algae blooms and a lot of other things to happen as well. And so it is a really bad thing. So we want to make sure we're controlling it. So that's why we recommend using some fertilizer in order to keep your lawn going. So there are other ways that we're not going to get into in this, and that you can mitigate that. So clover fixes nitrogen. So that's one thing you can use in your lawn, which will help the turf grass, and it lives a little more symbiotically. So it goes that way. But so you should have some sort of nitrogen going down on your lawn in order to reduce erosion, in order to reduce chemical use on there as well. So you are 1,000% correct. You pegged me on that one. Is the mullet look is absolutely what we go for in our house. But now we kind of spread the party and the love all around now. And so I need to do a garden tour. We're close to having all of my things back to where it's supposed to be. We worked a lot this weekend on getting there. So we're getting closer. So we'll start showing off a little more once I get my act back together again after a couple of mishaps on things. So we're getting there. But Gretchen, I'll come back to your question about grubs in a little bit here when we get to the odds and ends portion of the night. So that's a really good, important one to discuss. And so that next one there is reducing fertilizer. So it's really important. And so the other piece of that is that you can put 1/2 pound down in the fall, but if you really want things to, and that it is really a nitrogen, we can go into a whole talk on nitrogen itself, but nitrogen moves around a lot in the soil. So it attaches to the groundwater, it attaches to the rainwater, and it moves around. And so by putting it in, it helps you give strong plants going into the winter. If you want your grass to be greener in the spring and through the summer, you can put another 1/2 pound down in the spring. And so that's a second 1/2 pound that you can use if you would like to, but you don't need to put any more than that down on your soil. So the next one is eliminating weed control. So this is number 6 here. Is weed control is really bad. Do not use weed control unless you absolutely have to. So I'm not a purist on not using. I will use glyphosate to kill thistles. So I don't know if I'll be that way my entire life, but there's some things that just need to die. And thistles are one of them because they cause lots of problems and they go all over the place. Brome grass also kills out a lot of my native plants. And so I use some glyphosate on brome grass as well if I can't get them to stop growing and invading my landscape. So we use some chemicals on some things. And so I'm not a purist on advocating to never, ever use a chemical. I think there's a time and a place, but it should be minimized as much as humanly possible. And so by doing that, we want to have a somewhat healthy lawn that takes care of itself and doesn't allow for a lot of thistles and a lot of other things to come in that just cause problems in your lawn. And so eliminate weed control as much as possible. And so that means you can hand pull things. Also means just to not worry about it. Creeping Charlie is not really a problem unless it absolutely drives you crazy. I mean, it is not a huge problem. It's good for pollinators. It smells cool when you walk on it in the summer and that kind of thing. So Creeping Charlie is not a huge problem. Dandelions are also not a huge problem. If you have a lawn that is growing and doing okay, you're going to have some dandelions, but you won't have a ton if you are taking care of it and staying on top of things. So you can pull those by hand. I've got a dandelion puller, but I just mostly don't care. So that's a benefit that I have. But if you really do care about dandelions, then you can pull them. And if you get to a point where it doesn't do that, then you can use a broadleaf herbicide and kill off those weeds, but do that very sparingly. So only use it where it's necessary and go with it that way. The next thing, which is kind of a combination of 5 and 6 together, is weed and feed. So if you've been around here very much, you know my very big hatred of weed and feed products. And so weed and feed products are a fertilizer combined with an herbicide that will kill weeds in your grass. So sometimes it is a post-emergent, which means it's after a seed has sprouted and is growing. It has a post-emergent with it, and it just sprays the whole thing everywhere, no matter where you need it, don't need it. It just adds a ton of chemicals to your landscape. Don't do that. Sometimes that's a pre-emergent. Pre-emergents are even more dangerous and have proven to be significantly higher levels of cancer-causing agents in them than post-emergent herbicides have as well. And so that also puts it down, and it stays in your landscape for months. And you don't want to use these things. So don't use pre-emergents, don't use post-emergents unless you absolutely have to for other reasons. So you want to eliminate that weed control, and you do that best by having a healthy lawn that keeps the weeds out, that you really, really don't want those invasive, noxious weeds that are possibly present there. So all these things, hopefully you're seeing all this kind of works together, and it makes your life more carefree by not having to worry about all these things in your landscape. Or you could just do like this is where part of this blister came from, was we did a little project where we put the pool back in over here outside my left shoulder. And so we pulled everything out and we put landscape fabric down and we took care of it that way. And so in your landscape beds, I highly recommend not using landscape fabric, but in a place like under a pool, it works pretty well, but it hurts getting there. So we'll talk about and show you that project later. But then I want to get to odds and ends. These are just like lawn care things that people talk about and have questions about and don't know exactly how to do things. So one is dethatching. So a lot of folks pay money and buy expensive equipment to do dethatching in the spring, and you don't want to do this. So dethatching is not a good thing to do. A lot of times it can damage and hurt the turf plants and cause them to need more nutrients and more work in order to keep them where they are. So if you do it when it's too wet, you can dislodge that crown of the turf plant and cause damage to that, which will set it back, which will cause other problems on it. But mostly you want to leave those nutrients. So as in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, we do not have thatch. It's just not simply something that our lawns do not create. The way you get thatch is by being in southern landscapes where that grass plant is growing for 9-10 months out of the year or more. And so that's constantly growing, and it is not decomposing faster than it is growing. And so in our climate, all those grass clippings and all of that crowns where the growth point of the plant, those are always decomposing. And so those are constantly decomposing. When people are saying they're dethatching, all you're doing is using a mechanical rake. It's not actually dethatching. And so the only way in our climate that you could ever get to that is if you are basically like a golf course and putting down way too much nitrogen in order to keep that grass plant growing constantly and at a really fast rate. And so that could be some thatch issues there, but in a home landscape, it's really difficult to get to that point. And so those are there. So dethatching is something you can skip. You don't need to worry about it. What happens when you dethatch is your grass will look browner than a neighbor's grass that does dethatch in the spring. And the reason is because you pull all that dead grass, the clippings and last year's grass out of the landscape. And what happens is that allows the soil to warm up faster. And so you have hotter soil, which gets the grass plant growing faster, but it also removes all those nutrients and it keeps it from being able to recycle those nutrients into your landscape. And also it causes it to have more long-term holistic issues by going into dormancy faster and just different things like that. So you want to make sure to leave those all there. And so KDS, a safe place to dispose of bags of fertilizer, it says that we have decided we don't want to use. Yeah, so your hazardous waste, depending on where you live, usually your county has some access or can tell you where to go for hazardous waste disposal. And so those should absolutely go to a hazardous waste facility, which means they put them in clay line so that they aren't leaching, or at least aren't supposed to be leaching, and those all go in there, or they get burned depending on what it is. And so you can take it to those hazardous waste facilities in Scott County. It's here in Southern Scott County, and so it's a really great way. They might charge you $5-10 to do that. Usually, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but you can absolutely dispose of them in a hazardous waste facility. All right, so that's dethatching. Bagging. I hate using the word never, but you never really want to bag your lawn clippings as you are mowing. The best reason for doing that is so if you want to use that as mulch somewhere. So I use my lawn clippings as mulch, especially on my tomatoes. So that is what I use my lawn clippings when I bag it for that way. But what happens every time, it's about a 20-25 day cycle, depending on how much it's raining, for you to mow your grass, and for that, those molecules that are in that grass, the nutrients that are in that grass clipping to get down to decompose, get in the root system and back up into the plant. So it's a 3-week-ish cycle, depending on what's going on and what your soil types are, for those nutrients to get recycled through there. And so anytime you remove those grass clippings, you are removing those nutrients that those plants are having access to. And you'll need to replace those somehow if you're removing all the clippings all the time. So anybody who is removing clippings is just wanting to use more petroleum-based nitrogen to fertilize that landscape. So you want to leave those there pretty much every single time, unless you have a better and higher use. All right, now we're going to get into seeding a little bit, and we're going to just talk about seeding. Dog spot repair, Laura asked about earlier. And with seeding, the best time to seed your lawn is between August 15th and September 15th. You can be, depending on what our season is, you can start a couple weeks after that, a couple weeks before that. But August 15th, middle of August to middle of September is the best time to seed that lawn, because what happens is it gives it enough time for those roots to grow deep in order to make it through the winter. And so that's the number one time to get those things done. And with dog spots, depending on what time of season and when you want to do that, dog spots are really a pain. I mean, they're really difficult. What creates dog spots? Usually it's female dogs, because where they pee is very concentrated in one spot. And so as you may know, I'm state representative in the legislature, and I do a lot of door knocking and talking to folks. And I came upon someone who had the dog out last week, and it was in her lawn, and she had a water that after the dog peed, she poured a pitcher of water on it to dilute that urea, which is in the urine, and get that diluted out, so it wasn't going to cause dog spots on her lawn. And so that's one way you could do it. That's a little aggressive, if you ask me. But if you do end up with a lot of dog spots, what you need to do is introduce more new soil into that area. So you want to kind of rough it all up. The dead spot needs to kind of get that soil that's at the dead spot. You can just spread it around into further areas and just put a couple handfuls of topsoil down on that, and then put grass seed down. And you can do this any time of the year. If it really bothers you, you can just do it any time of the year for that. But the best time to make sure you're renovating and getting more seed down is that fall time period. So you can fix any spots in the fall that are still there, and that'll work that way. Another thing we highly recommend is training of your dog. So if you, and this is a lot easier said than done. Like I have a female dog, but she's taller, so it doesn't really have nearly as much of a problem as some shorter dogs have on the dog spot. And some dogs just have a lot more urea in their urine than others do, which is just, it's basically like if you ever are filling up, putting fertilizer in your spreader and you miss some, and you have a you drop some fertilizer on the ground, it gets over fertilized and it kills off that area. It's exactly the same thing that happens with dog spots. And so training your dog to use just one area. So if you have like a mulched area, you can generally 99.9% of the time won't harm those plants that are in that area. So if you wanted to do that, that works. Some folks train their dog to use an area on artificial turf, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if you want something that looks green, you can still do it that way. But those dog spots, you just need to rough them up. You need to get some new soil on there and then put some seed down with it is the best way to do that. So hopefully I answered your question there, Laura. And then fertilizer recommendations. So Grady asked about fertilizer recommendations. In Minnesota, we cannot use phosphorus. It is illegal to use phosphorus in a landscape setting unless you put down new seed or sod. And the reason for that is because phosphorus is a nutrient required for new plant growth. And so it's allowed to be used at that point. But other than that, you can't do that. So there are probably the best one for lawns is a 10-0-5. So the first number is nitrogen, second number is phosphorus, third number is potassium, so NPK. And so nitrogen should be 5 or 10, 0 on the phosphorus, and a 5 or 10 on the potassium. So whatever you find. I generally don't recommend, and this kind of goes against the general wisdom of everything, but I generally don't recommend soil tests for lawns. A, because I don't care that much. B, because nitrogen is very mobile in the soil. And so you can do a nitrogen test on May 1st, and by June 15th, it's going to be a totally different number on there. So it's not really useful. If you're having consistent chronic problems where you just can't get grass to green up or there's something wrong, then you can absolutely do a soil test of that area. But I just generally don't recommend because it's a hassle and it's unnecessary. It doesn't give you enough actionable information to do anything with that soil test. And so I very much recommend a 5-0, 10-0-5, 10-0-10, something like that for and also a slow release. Using a slow release type fertilizer for those times is also really good as well. So put it down Labor Day, Memorial Day. So those are the two times that I recommend doing that. Then on the odds and ends side of things, told Gretchen we talk about grubs. So grubs are the larval form of Japanese beetles, which are terrible. And I haven't seen one yet, so I don't know if anybody else has seen a Japanese beetle, but they were very minimal Japanese beetles last year. The year before were just a ton of them. So we'll see what happens this year. But they're the grubs are larvae of beetles, basically. So June bugs a lot of the grubs that you see are larvae for June bugs. Lightning bugs also are grubs as well. And so there are many different things that are grubs. And so usually, again, 9 times out of 10, grubs are not a big problem. Grubs become a problem if you over fertilize. So if you use a lot of nitrogen, it's a lot easier to get a big grub problem in your landscape if you are using a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. So they're attracted to that because it's a lot more growth in those roots and in the shoots there, and so it's a lot easier for them to eat, so they multiply faster, and so that's really good. And also it's a lot easier for the adults to get their eggs in the soil of over fertilized landscapes as well. And so that's one thing. If you do have a big problem, you need to make sure, so what you want to do is just cut. So if this is your grass growing here, you want to take a spade and cut underneath, so you're just like a ½ inch underneath of that grass, and then peel that up and look. And if you see a lot of white curly guys, they're C-shaped, white. They can be pink, orange, brown, different colors, but light colored. Some will be really small. Some will be up to an inch or so. So you want to use that. You want to make sure that you actually have grubs before you do any treatment of grubs, because you are, like I said, killing a lot of things as you treat grubs. So there's not a just here treat for Japanese beetles. It is killing all grubs when you do that. So you want to make sure that it's required to be done. And so the best way to do that is let me pull up a Japanese beetle. Let me pull up a life cycle of Japanese beetles here. Oh shoot, maybe I'm not going to find it easy. No, I can't find it. Sorry about that. But Japanese beetles, so they lay their eggs in the soil in the fall, and they hatch in the fall. And so then you've got little tiny larvae that last all winter long. In the spring, they start to grow as they eat and they get bigger. And then once they get to the summer, late spring, early summer, they are and all beetles have a slightly different type of, but if you know what you've got, then you want to kill them when they are at the mobile stage, because once they get really big, right before they become the beetle form, they stop moving. And so they get stuck in the soil and they're unable to reach anything else. They don't eat and they metamorphosize, or I think beetles metamorphosize, but they change into the beetle form. And so you want to make sure that you're killing them when they're mobile and when they're moving around. And so there's a product called GrubX, which it's a BT product. It is probably what you want to use if you have a big problem. But unless you're seeing officially that you have a grub problem, you just want to assume that it's something else. And the only way you can find it out is if you go under. So if you're starting to have like raccoons and possums or anything like that that are tearing up your lawn, they're probably looking for grubs, and you do have a problem, and you can treat it at that point. But it's also very seasonal. Sometimes you have a lot of them, sometimes you don't. So that's the best way to handle grubs, is to wait and see, and then to use a product like GrubX on there. All right, hopefully I'm done coughing on you guys. This is the most I've talked in days, but I hope it is going well for everyone here. So those are all the things that I have to talk about with Lazy Lawns. So this is Lawn Care 101, the basics of what you need to do. And so one is understand the more perfect you want to have that lawn, the more inputs, the more energy, and the more environmental issues you are causing by increasing that chemical use, water use, and fertilizer use on your lawn. So making sure that you are staying at that lower input range makes your life a lot easier and a lot cheaper, and it's a lot better for the environment. So that's number one. Number two is the seasons, making sure to embrace those seasons. You're using them to the best of your abilities. So it's watering appropriately in the spring and the fall. In the fall, also making sure that you are using that growth window for seeding, for fertilization, for those kinds of things. And you are getting your lawn in the spring and the fall prepped for the next difficult season. So that's embracing those seasons, reducing the water use so that you're watering appropriately for each season, deeper and less frequent in the spring and in the fall if it's necessary, and then more often and shallower watering in the summer months while that grass is getting stressed out, so you can keep that going. Number four is mowing. Make sure to mow as high as you possibly can. Set that mower blade up as high. You don't need to worry about that grass getting floppy or any problems like that, so you want to mow as high as you can, because that shades the soil, cools it down, and keeps weeds out. Number five is fertilizer. So reduce that fertilizer as much as you possibly can. You just need to use 0.5 pound per 1,000 square feet in the fall in order to make sure you're reducing erosion, that you're doing it that way. Organic fertilizers are best. So that goes there. Number six is eliminating weed control. Don't use any weed control chemicals unless you have to. There are some instances where you have to, but don't in general in your landscape use any weed control chemicals, because they're dangerous for you, your pets, your family, and everybody around you, including all the entire local ecosystem with the black-capped chickadees and the insects, and everybody needs that, and we don't want to poison them all. So that's there. And then odds and ends, dethatching. There's no need to use dethatching in your landscape. Bagging your lawn, make sure to leave those those lawn clippings on your grass, and then seeding, make sure to seed between August 15th and September 15th. So somewhere in that 4-week window around Memorial Day is the best time for doing these landscape kinds of things. So Grady asked about aeration. I'm assuming that is not a good idea. Aeration is actually great. Aeration is a really good thing to do if you have really thick growing lawn, because what happens is you can get compaction in there, or if you have a place where kids play soccer all the time or something like that, you can have compaction, that grass won't grow. So aeration doesn't do anything negative environmentally. It's all it does is it takes it, again, we'll use this as your lawn. It has a cylinder that goes into the ground, and then it pulls out a core. And so that core just gets left and laying on top. And so it activates a lot of the nitrogen nutrients in the soil. So it's really important, especially if you have, now that I'm thinking more about this, number one reason for doing aeration is after you get sod. So if you have a new house and you have a sodded lawn, they seed sod so tightly to get those rolls of sod. And so that grass is really, really packed in there way, way, way too tight. And so after that grass gets established and it starts growing in the landscape, then you want to, for the next 3 years, to go through and aerate that lawn because you want to basically kill off a lot of that grass to give all the stuff that's existing there room to grow. And so aeration is actually a really good thing if you have a couple of problems, but it's not something that the vast majority of people need to worry about unless it's highly problematic for one reason or another. If there's a specific reason to do it, aeration is great. It's one of the better things that you can do for your lawn. So hopefully that answers your question. Through there, we're going to go for another 10 minutes here and answer anybody's questions that you've got. So make sure to toss those in the chat. It's just great to be with everybody. It's been a while since we've been able to do this. I want to go through a couple things with folks as we are doing that. So let me pull this up here. All right, so a couple things for everybody. Those folks who are on here that are Minnesota Garden Club members, we have our summer native prairie walk. That's going to be in Northfield at their Arboretum in Northfield. So that's July 16th at 3 p.m. So I'm really excited about that one. Our fall workshop will be about fall landscape, and we're going to talk about leaves and making sure that we are handling fall landscapes in the best environmental and ethical ways for everything. And then we're also going to have a fall garden walk and this is for Minnesota Gardening Club members. And again, thanks everybody for being here who's a club member. On October 15th, we're going to have a Minneapolis fall garden walk. We've got a couple neighborhoods in Minneapolis that are just rocking for especially native plants. And so we're going to go through and check those out. So make sure everybody sign up for those things if you're a Minnesota Gardening Club member. And then just let everybody know, we've had a lot of really great podcasts coming out. So the most recent ones are with Tim Clemens, who, if you follow MN Forager on Instagram, Tim is amazing. And he was such a great conversation talking about foraging and urban foraging specifically and the ethics of everything. And it was really cool. Then one of my favorite ones that we've done so far in the entire Minnesota Gardening podcast time is with Mary Jo Hoffman. She has a photography blog that she started, and she has over 4,000 photos that are just a white background and some still image. And so she started this, and she does it one every single day. And so she started in 2012. You can find those at stillblog.net, but just give that one a listen because she's absolutely amazing. So I loved chatting with her on there. Couple paid things. We have Quick Huddle, which is if you have a question. So if you have a question about if you need to aerate your lawn, or is your ash tree dying of emerald ash borer, just what's going on. It's a quick 10-minute. You can just click this here. It takes you to a Calendly link where you can go through and find a time that works for you. So today's the 18th. So if you go tomorrow, we put lots of time. So you've got between 8 and 10 tomorrow. I don't have any other meetings scheduled. So you can go on here and you can just schedule a 10-minute FaceTime or Zoom, and we can go through and figure out what the issue is, and I'll give you guidance that way. And then last one I want to talk about is Minnesota Gardening Club. So Minnesota Gardening Club, if you are on here tonight and not a Minnesota Gardening Club member, you can join for just $7, and that's just tonight through midnight. And so it's $7 a month from there. But we open up Minnesota Gardening Club every season. So the 21st is the first day of summer. So it's going to be open through the 21st. So if you join tonight, $7. But if you join tomorrow, it's $10 a month, which is our normal price for everybody there. So you go to minnesotagardening.club.com and you can grab that there. Or if you go to minnesotagardening.com, we've got Minnesota Gardening Club right here. So those are a couple things. Would love to work with everybody. Hopefully you've learned a lot tonight, and hopefully you're going to use less chemicals as this all moves forward, and less water, and make sure to help save the world here. We got a lot of work to do. So we are on there. So great asking about aeration. Laura asked about leave on or off the grass in the fall. We are absolutely a leave the leaves on the grass kind of people here at Minnesota Gardening. So it does a lot of really great things. It goes back to that same concept of clippings and making sure to return those nutrients to the soil. It also is the overwintering home for just so many insects, moths, butterflies, pupae, all those kinds of things. A lot of vast majority of our native bees and insects here in Minnesota, they overwinter in that leaf. So all of our rusty patch bumblebees, they all live in that. They overwinter in that. They go into the ground underneath of those leaves, and so they need to have that ability there. And so we definitely want to leave the leaves there because we don't put the health of our turf grass over the health of the ecosystem around us. But if you want to do a couple things to make sure your turf grass, you just need to be able to see about a third of those grass blades in order to make sure that that grass will grow in the spring again. So you don't need to worry about it. If you can see some of that grass through those leaves, they will be just fine heading into spring. And if you come into spring and you feel like there's a problem for some reason, you can just gently rake them up a little bit and they'll be totally fine. So we're definitely a leaves on the grass kind of folks here, but we'll talk a lot more about that this fall on things. So hopefully you can join us there, and hopefully you can join us as a member of the Minnesota Gardening Club. And so again, it's tonight, it's $7 a month. Starting tomorrow, it'll be the normal $10 a month. So just want to get as many folks in there as we can and doing a lot of really cool things. So you get monthly, I guess I can get out of this here. You get task lists. We have a lot of, I personally answer a lot of things. We have a foundations course. We have this lazy lawn care will be a course that we will have available here in the next couple of weeks. And so that'll be free to everybody who is a member of the Minnesota Gardening Club. So that is there. And so it's just a really great way to learn more about native landscape, about making sure that you're feeding pollinators, limiting chemicals, saving water, and storing carbon. So that's what we do. So if there are any other questions, we'll sign off from here. But there'll be a replay available for Minnesota Gardening Club members that you were able to find anytime you go there. But just appreciate you all and have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks, everybody.